You know that silence? That heavy, suffocating silence when the power goes out in the middle of July? It's not peaceful. It's heavy. It presses against your eardrums like a physical weight. You can hear the refrigerators in the neighborhood dying a slow death, the ice cubes melting in the trays, and the collective groan of 200 suburbanites realizing their AC units just became expensive paperweights. It was 98 degrees in the shade, with humidity so thick you could practically chew it. The local grid had folded like a cheap lawn chair around 4:00 p.m., overwhelmed by everyone trying to turn their living rooms into meat lockers. By 8:00 p.m., the sun had gone down, but the heat hadn't. The asphalt was still radiating waves of misery, and the air was stagnant. Except at my house. At my house, the lights were on. The refrigerator was humming a happy tune. The Wi-Fi was blinking green. And most importantly, the central air conditioning was pushing glorious, crisp, 68-degree air through the vents. I was sitting in my recliner, a frosty bottle of IPA in my hand, watching the local news report on the blackouts on my big screen. I felt like a king of the suburbs. And all thanks to the Predator 9500 inverter generator sitting on the concrete pad in my side yard. I'd bought the beast 3 months ago. My wife, Sarah, had rolled her eyes at the time. Do we really need a generator that big, Jack? It looks like something you'd use to power a field hospital. When the zombie apocalypse hits, or when the grid fails because everyone turns on their air fryers at once, you'll thank me, I'd told her. She was currently asleep in the master bedroom, under a heavy duvet, blissfully unaware of the thermal hellscape outside. She had thanked me 3 times before bed. I was riding high. Then came the knock. It wasn't a polite, "Hey neighbor, got a cup of sugar?" Knock. It was a rhythmic, authoritative pounding, the kind of knock that demands compliance. I paused the TV. I looked at the clock. 10:45 p.m. Who the hell? I muttered, hauling myself out of the recliner. I walked to the front door, enjoying the sensation of the cold floor tiles against my bare feet. I peered through the peephole. The fisheye lens distorted the face, but there was no mistaking the haircut. It was an inverted bob, stiff with hairspray, blonde highlights fighting a losing war against the humidity. It was Mrs. van der Hoven, the president of the HOA, the woman who once measured the length of my grass with a literal ruler. I sighed, the air leaving my lungs in a long, weary deflation. I unlocked the door and swung it open. "Evening, Patricia," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Bit warm out there for a stroll, isn't it?" She didn't smile. She never smiled. She was wearing a silk nightgown with a floral robe wrapped tight, and her face was glistening with sweat. She looked like a melting candle of indignation. "Jack," she snapped, not bothering with pleasantries. "We need to talk about that, machine." "The generator?" I asked, taking a sip of my beer. "Yeah, it's a lifesaver. Power company says the grid might be down until tomorrow noon. You guys holding up okay? Need some ice? I've got plenty." She recoiled, as if I'd offered her a bag of anthrax. "I do not need your ice, Jack. I need you to turn it off." I blinked. "Excuse me?" "Turn it off," she enunciated, chopping her hand through the air with each word. "It is nearly 11 o'clock at night. The noise is unbearable. Patricia, it's an inverter generator. It's enclosed. It's rated for like 67 decibels. That's quieter than a normal conversation." "It is not," she hissed. "It is a constant, droning thrum. It is vibrating through the ground. My crystal stemware in the china cabinet is clinking together. I cannot sleep. My husband cannot sleep. With all due respect, I said, my patience already fraying, if I turn this off, my house hits 90 degrees in an hour. My food spoils. My wife wakes up sweating. I'm not turning it off. She crossed her arms. Section 4, paragraph B of the Rolling Hills HOA bylaws states that no resident shall create a nuisance noise after 10 o'clock p.m. You are in violation. Emergency situations usually supersede noise ordinances, Patricia. It's a blackout. There is no exception clause for emergencies in the bylaws, she said triumphantly. If you do not shut that infernal machine down immediately, I will be forced to document this violation and issue a formal citation. I looked past her into the dark street. Every other house was a tomb. I looked back at her sweating face. So, let me get this straight, I said, lowering my voice. You'd rather I sweat, my food rot, and my family suffer just so your wine glasses stop shivering? I want peace and quiet, she shrieked, her voice cracking. Turn it off. No, I said simply. Good night, Patricia. I closed the door. I didn't slam it. I just closed it firmly. I locked the deadbolt. I went back to my recliner, but the beer tasted a little less sweet. I unpaused the TV, but I couldn't focus. I could hear it now. The faint, distant hum of the generator outside. It wasn't loud. It was a steady purr. But knowing she was out there, listening to it, stewing in the heat, it changed the vibe. I fell asleep on the couch eventually. The next morning, the power kicked back on around 9 o'clock a.m. I went outside to shut down the generator and check the oil. There, taped to the metal casing of my beautiful machine with blue painter's tape, was a white envelope. I ripped it open. Notice of violation. Resident, Jack Miller. Violation. Excessive noise, nuisance. Section 4.B. Description. Unapproved mechanical noise exceeding community standards during quiet hours. Fine, $250 HOAs. Correction. Required. Immediate cessation of use or installation of approved sound dampening measures. I stared at the paper. My hands started to shake. It wasn't the money. $250 wasn't going to bankrupt me. It was the audacity. The absolute, unmitigated gall. I walked into the kitchen and slapped the paper down on the counter. Sarah was making coffee. What's that? She asked, eyeing my face. You look like you're about to bite someone. Patricia, I growled. She fined me. She actually fined me for keeping the lights on. Sarah picked up the paper. Sound dampening measures? What does that even mean? It means war, I said. She wants quiet? I'll give her quiet. I spent the next 3 days in the garage. If the HOA wanted sound mitigation, I would give them engineering perfection. I went to Home Depot and bought $300 worth of plywood, mass-loaded vinyl, acoustic foam, and ventilation fans. I built a box. A beautiful box. It was double-walled, with an air gap in the middle filled with rock wool insulation. It had baffled air intakes to allow the generator to breathe without letting sound escape. I painted it a tasteful beige to match the siding of the house. I tested it. With the generator running at full load inside the box, you could stand 3 feet away and barely hear a whisper. It was a masterpiece of acoustic engineering. I requested a compliance inspection. Saturday morning, 10 o'clock a.m. Patricia arrived with her clipboard and a handheld decibel meter she had clearly bought on Amazon for $20. She was accompanied by Roger, the HOA treasurer, a man who looked like he had been born wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt tucked in too tight. "All right," I said, gesturing to the box in the side yard. "Fire it up." I hit the remote start. The generator kicked on inside the box. You heard a muffled thump, and then almost nothing. Just a soft movement of air from the exhaust vent. I smiled. "Well, pretty quiet, right?" Patricia walked up to the box. She held the decibel meter out like a Geiger counter at Chernobyl. She frowned at the reading. "What's it say?" I asked. 58, she muttered. 58, I laughed. "Patricia, a dishwasher is 60. Birds chirping are 55. You cannot possibly tell me this is a nuisance." She lowered the meter. She walked around the box. She ran a finger along the beige paint. She looked at the gap between the box and the fence. "It's large," she said. "It has to be," I said. "Physics." "It's an unapproved structure," she said. My smile faltered. "What?" "Bylaw Section 9, Paragraph C," she recited, as if she had the damn book tattooed on the inside of her eyelids. "Any permanent or semi-permanent structure exceeding 3 feet in height must be approved by the Architectural Review Committee prior to construction. You didn't submit an application." "It's a box for the generator. You told me to quiet down," I argued, feeling a vein in my forehead start to throb. "I'm complying with your order." "You complied with the noise order by violating the structure order," Roger chimed in. His voice was nasally, like he had a permanent sinus infection. "You can't just build sheds in the setback area, Jack." "It's not a shed. It's a cover. It's removable." "It looks permanent," Patricia said, making a note on her clipboard. "And frankly, it's an eyesore. It doesn't match the architectural aesthetic of the neighborhood. The beige is off." "It's the same beige as my house." I pointed to the siding. "I used the leftover paint from when we painted the trim." "It has oxidized differently," she said smoothly. "I'm denying the mitigation. The box has to go. And since you're still running the generator for this test, I'm logging another noise violation because the fan on the box is creating a new frequency, a low-frequency hum. Very disturbing." I stared at her. I looked at Roger, who was busy trying to get a piece of spinach out of his teeth with his tongue. "You're kidding," I said. "I never kid about property values, Jack," Patricia said. She ripped a pink slip off her pad and handed it to me. "Second violation, $500, plus a mandated removal of the unapproved structure within 48 hours, or we hire a contractor to remove it and bill you." "You want me to remove the box that makes the generator quiet?" "I want you to follow the rules," she said. She turned on her heel, her floral robe flapping in the breeze. "Have a nice day, Jack." I stood there in the driveway, holding the pink slip. The sun was beating down on me. The generator inside its rejected box purred softly, mocking me. I went inside. I grabbed a beer. It was 10:30 a.m. I didn't care. "How'd it go?" Sarah asked from the living room. "She fined me again," I said, my voice dead calm. "And she told me to tear down the box." "What?" Sarah walked in. "But what are we supposed to do? If the power goes out again, we just burn?" "Apparently," I said. "According to Patricia, we can have power, or we can have compliance. But we can't have both." I sat at the kitchen island, staring at the pink slip. 750, total in fines. I could fight it in small claims court, sure. I'd probably win, eventually. But that would take months, and in the meantime, she'd fine me every week. She'd put a lien on the house. She'd make my life a living hell. I looked out the sliding glass door to the backyard. Beyond my fence, I could see Patricia's house. It was a sprawling 2-story colonial. And behind it, glistening in the midday sun, was her pride and joy. The pool. It was a custom kidney-shaped monstrosity with a waterfall, imported Italian tile, and a massive tanning deck. Patricia spent every afternoon there, from 2:00 p.m. to 5:00 p.m., roasting herself like a rotisserie chicken. She loved that pool. She loved the sun. I took a sip of beer. "I need to disconnect," I whispered. "What?" Sarah asked. "The grid," I said, looking up. My brain was starting to churn. Gears that hadn't turned since my college engineering days were grinding off the rust. "She says the generator is too loud. She says the box is an ugly structure. She's using the HOA bylaws to choke me out." "Okay," Sarah said slowly. "So?" "So," I said, a slow, wicked grin spreading across my face. "I need something she can't touch. Something federal. Something that supersedes the HOA." I pulled out my laptop. I started typing. Federal laws overriding HOA restrictions. Solar access rights. Wind energy easements. I found it. The American Clean Energy and Security Act. And state-specific statutes regarding the right to generate. No homeowners association or covenant may prohibit the installation of a renewable energy device. I read on. Solar panels were the obvious choice, but solar panels lay flat on the roof. They were discreet. Patricia wouldn't even notice them. And frankly, solar panels didn't cast a shadow. I needed something with presence. I needed something vertical. I Googled residential wind turbines. Most of them were small, flimsy things, little propellers you mount on a pole. But then I found the commercial-grade residential units, vertical axis wind turbines, VWTs. They looked like massive spinning corkscrews or DNA helices. They were sleek, industrial, and, most importantly, tall. I looked at the property map on the county website. I pulled up a sun trajectory calculator. My lot was directly west of Patricia's. The prevailing winds in our valley came from the north-northwest. If I placed a turbine in the back corner of my lot, a 30-foot tower, with a 10-foot blade span, I did the math. I checked the angles. At 3:00 p.m. in July, the sun sits at an azimuth of roughly 260 degrees and an elevation of 55 degrees. A 35-foot structure on my property line would cast a shadow approximately 25 feet long, directly, onto her deck. And because it was a turbine, the shadow wouldn't just sit there. It would move. It would flicker. A constant, strobing interruption of her sunlight. I looked at the price tag. The whole setup, turbine, tower, battery bank, inverter, professional installation, would cost about $15,000. It was the savings account we'd set aside for a trip to Europe. I looked at Sarah. "Honey," I said, "how much do you really want to go to Italy?" She looked at me, then at the pink fine slip on the counter, then out the window at Patricia's house. Sarah was a gentle soul, usually, but Patricia had once reported Sarah for planting the wrong shade of marigolds. "Why?" Sarah asked, her eyes narrowing. "I have an idea," I said. "It involves heavy machinery, federal law, and ruining Patricia's tan forever." Sarah didn't hesitate. "Book it." I picked up the phone. I didn't call a regular electrician. I called Big Mike. Mike wasn't just a contractor. He was an artist of malicious compliance. We'd gone to high school together. He ran an outfit called Grid Be Gone. He hated HOAs more than he hated rust. "Mikey," I said when he picked up, "it's Jack. I've got a job." "Jack," he boomed. "Long time. What do you need? Solar? Backup battery?" "I need wind, Mike. I need big wind. I need the biggest, ugliest, most legally protected wind turbine you can source, and I need it installed in the northwest corner of my lot." "The northwest corner?" Mike paused. I could hear him looking at a mental map. "Jack, isn't that right up against old lady Vanderhoven's property line?" "It is. And doesn't she have that fancy pool right there?" "She does." There was a silence on the line. Then a low, guttural chuckle started. It grew into a laugh. "I'm looking at the specs for a Skystream 3.7, Mike said, his voice trembling with joy. "But if we really want to maximize the efficiency and the shadow profile, we should go with a vertical axis helix. It looks like a giant egg beater from Mars, industrial gray, ugly as sin." "Does it hum?" I asked. "Oh, it hums, Jack. But it's wind noise. Nature's noise. HOA can't say a damn thing about the wind." "When can you start?" "I'll be there Monday with the excavator," Mike said. "I'll bring the permits, the federal permits." I hung up the phone. The pink slip on the counter didn't look like a defeat anymore. It looked like an invitation. "What are you smiling about?" Sarah asked. "I'm just thinking about the environment," I said, grabbing a fresh beer. "We're going green, babe. We're going so screen." Monday morning arrived with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The sun was barely peeking over the horizon when the rumbling started. It wasn't the gentle hum of my generator this time. It was the guttural roar of a diesel engine. Big Mike didn't do things by halves. He pulled up to the curb in a truck that looked like it had seen combat, towing a flatbed trailer that carried a mini excavator. Behind him was another truck loaded with rebar, bags of concrete, and long, ominous-looking steel sections. I walked out to the driveway, coffee in hand, feeling a thrill of pure adrenaline. Mike hopped out of the truck. He was a mountain of a man, wearing a neon yellow vest that strained against his shoulders, and a hard hat covered in stickers that said things like, "Warning, I do what I want," and "OSHA? I barely know her." "Morning, sunshine," Mike bellowed, slapping me on the back with a force that nearly dislodged my retinas. "Ready to save the planet?" "Born ready," I said. "You got the paperwork?" Mike tapped a thick plastic tube strapped to his back. "Permits, schematics, and a laminated copy of the 2005 Energy Policy Act, highlighted in neon pink. Let's dig a hole." We marked the spot. The very back corner of the yard, right up against the 6-foot privacy fence that separated my kingdom from the empire of Patricia. From this vantage point, I could see the top of her pool umbrella. It was perfect. The excavator roared to life. The bucket bit into kitchat, the earth. Crunch. Scoop. Dump. It took exactly 12 minutes for the first scout to arrive. It wasn't Patricia. It was Roger, the treasurer. He was walking his poodle, a dog that looked less like an animal and more like a Q-tip with anxiety. Roger stopped on the sidewalk, staring at the excavator tearing up my lawn. "Jack!" he called out, his voice thin and reedy over the engine noise. "Jack! What is going on here?" I signaled Mike to idle the engine. The silence that followed was heavy with dust. "Morning, Roger," I said cheerfully. "Just doing some landscaping." "Landscaping?" Roger eyed the hole, which was already 4 feet deep and getting wider. "That looks like a foundation. You putting in a pool?" "Nope." "A gazebo?" "Nope." "Well, what is it?" Roger demanded, the poodle trembling at his ankles. "You didn't submit an ARC form for this. You know the rules. Any excavation deeper than 12 inches requires board approval." I walked over to the fence, leaning on it casually. "Actually, Roger, this falls under a different jurisdiction. I'm installing a renewable energy system, specifically a residential wind turbine." Roger blinked. His mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. A windmill? In the suburbs?" "Turbine," I corrected. Windmills grind grain. Turbines generate freedom. You can't do that, Roger said, finding his footing. Absolutely not. The height restrictions in the CC&Rs are clear. Nothing over 25 feet. And aesthetics. My God, Jack, you can't put up a windmill. It'll look like a farm. It's going to look like the future, Roger. I'm calling Patricia, he threatened, fumbling for his phone. You do that, I said. Tell her to bring her measuring tape. Mike revved the engine, drowning out Roger's sputtered reply. We went back to work. By noon, the hole was massive. It was a cube of empty space, waiting to be filled with concrete and spite. At 12:30, the inevitable happened. Patricia arrived. But she didn't come alone. She brought the cavalry. A white SUV with Community Patrol stenciled on the side pulled up. It wasn't the real police. It was the private security firm the HOA hired to harass teenagers skateboarding in the park. The guy who got out, Officer Miller, no relation, thank God, looked like he'd been rejected from the police academy for being too intense about parking violations. Patricia marched up the driveway, her face a mask of cold fury. Roger trailed behind her like a nervous squire. "Stop this immediately!" Patricia screamed, pointing a manicured finger at the excavator. Mike, bless him, just turned up the radio in the cab. Sweet Home Alabama blasted through the open window. "Jack," Patricia yelled, "I am ordering you to cease and desist. This is a violation of everything." I walked down the driveway to meet them. I held up a hand. "Patricia, officer," I said. "How can I help you?" "You are digging an illegal foundation?" Patricia spat. "Officer Miller, make him stop." Miller puffed out his chest. He hooked his thumbs into his belt, dangerously close to his taser. "Sir, the HOA president states you are in violation of community bylaws. I'm going to have to ask you to shut down the equipment until this is resolved." I looked at Miller. "Am I breaking a law, officer? A state or federal law?" "Well, no. But the HOA rules are a binding contract." "Civil matter," I cut in. "If she has a problem with my contract, she can sue me. But you have no authority to stop construction on private property unless I'm endangering the public. You are endangering the aesthetic integrity of the neighborhood," Patricia shrieked. "That's not a crime, Patricia. That's an opinion." "I will fine you," she threatened. "I will fine you $1,000 a day. I will put a lien on your house so fast your head will spin." I reached into the tube Mike had given me. I pulled out the laminated document. "Patricia," I said, my voice calm and reasonable, "are you familiar with the state statute 720.3075, the prohibition of restrictions on renewable energy devices?" She stared at the paper. "The what?" "It's a state law," I explained, tapping the highlighted section. "It basically says that no HOA can prohibit a homeowner from installing a renewable energy device based on aesthetics. You can't stop me from going green. In fact, if you try to stop me, or if you fine me for this, you are violating my civil rights under the Energy Policy Act." She snatched the paper from my hand. Her eyes scanned the text. Her lips moved silently as she read. I saw the moment the realization hit her. Her eyes widened. Her nostrils flared. This applies to solar panels," she stammered. "Roof things." "And wind turbines," I said, pointing to the clause. "Solar collectors or other renewable energy devices." "Wind is renewable, Patricia. Unless you're planning to ban the wind." She crumbled the paper in her hand. "This is a loophole. A dirty, legal trick." "It's the law," I said, taking the paper back and smoothing it out. "Now, if you'll excuse me, Mike and I have a concrete pour scheduled for 2:00 p.m., and concrete waits for no one." "This isn't over," she hissed. "I'll call the city. I'll call code enforcement. You need a building permit for a structure that size. Got it right here, I said, whipping out the second document. Approved by the county building department last Thursday. Signed, stamped, and paid for. She stared at the permit. She stared at the hole. She stared at me. Why are you doing this? She whispered. Why? Because you complained about my generator, I said softly. You wanted quiet. This turbine? It's going to be real quiet. You won't hear a thing. She turned and marched away, her heels clicking angrily on the pavement. Roger followed, looking back at the hole with a mixture of fear and awe. Officer Miller shrugged. Well, if you got a permit, you got a permit. Have a mutt. Nice day. He got back in his SUV and drove off to find a skateboarder to yell at. We poured the concrete. It was a massive slab, reinforced with rebar thick enough to hold up a bank vault. As the cement truck churned, I watched the wet, gray sludge fill the hole. It was setting. It was becoming permanent. That night, I sat on the back porch with Sarah. The yard was a mess of mud and equipment, but the foundation was done. She's going to sue us, Sarah said. She didn't sound scared, just resigned. Let her, I said. Mike knows a lawyer who specializes in this stuff. Apparently, HOAs lose these cases 99% of the time. The government really wants people to use green energy. We're practically heroes. Heroes with a windmill, Sarah mused. Turbine, I corrected. The next few days were a blur of activity. The concrete cured. The base plate was installed. And then the tower sections arrived. They weren't the cute little lattice towers you see on farms. These were solid steel monopoles. Thick, industrial cylinders that bolted together. When they were lying on the ground, they looked like sections of a sewer pipe. Patricia watched from her upstairs window. I could see the blinds twitching. On Thursday, the crane arrived. You want to talk about escalation? Bringing a 50-ton crane into a suburban cul-de-sac is the nuclear option of home improvement. The neighbors came out of their houses. Kids stopped riding their bikes. It was an event. Mike directed the crane operator with hand signals that looked like he was landing a fighter jet. Up, up, easy now. The first section of the tower rose into the air. It swung over the fence line, hovering for a moment like a monolith, before being lowered onto the bolts. Clang. Mike tightened the nuts with a pneumatic impact wrench. Tat-tat-tat. The sound echoed through the neighborhood. Section 2 went up. Then Section 3. The tower now stood 30 feet tall. It towered over the fence. It towered over the oak trees. It towered, most significantly, over Patricia's pool deck. Then came the turbine itself. It was a vertical axis model, just like Mike had promised. It didn't have a propeller. It had 3 helical blades that twisted around a central shaft. It looked like a piece of modern art designed by a mad scientist. It was painted a flat, non-reflective gray. Industrial slate, the catalog called it. The crane lifted it. It rose into the blue sky, a spinning monument to pettiness. As they lowered it onto the top of the tower, I saw Patricia come out into her backyard. She was wearing her swimsuit and a large sun hat. It was 1:00 p.m., her tanning time. She looked up. She had to crane her neck back. The turbine was hanging directly in her line of sight to the afternoon sun. She didn't scream. She didn't yell. She just stood there, her mouth slightly open, her sunglasses reflecting the giant steel intruder. Mike bolted it down. He connected the wiring harness. He gave the Blades a little push with his hand. They spun freely, silent and smooth. "That's a wrap on the hardware!" Mike yelled down. He climbed down the ladder. We stood back and admired it. It was terrible. It was magnificent. It was the biggest middle finger ever constructed in the tri-state area. "So," Mike said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag, "when do we flip the switch?" "The electrician comes tomorrow to wire it into the main panel and install the disconnect," I said. "We go live at noon." "Technically," Mike said, squinting at the sun, "you don't even need it to be generating power for the shadow to work. Physics works for free." He was right. The sun was moving. It was creeping westward. I looked at the ground. The shadow of the tower was currently falling on my own lawn, but it was lengthening. It was creeping toward the fence. I checked my watch. 1:15 p.m. In about 45 minutes, the leading edge of that shadow would breach the property line. I looked at Patricia. She was lying on her lounge chair, trying to ignore the 35-foot steel tower looming over her. She was determined to relax. She was going to tan, damn it. "Hey, Mike," I said. "Want a beer? Does a bear create nuisance noise in the woods?" Mike grinned. We sat on my back porch and waited. We weren't just watching paint dry. We were watching geometry happen. At 1:55 p.m., the shadow hit the fence. At 2:05 p.m., the shadow hit the pristine white concrete of her pool deck. At 2:15 p.m., the shadow touched the edge of the water. And then the wind picked up. It was just a breeze, maybe 5 miles per hour. But these vertical turbines are sensitive. They start spinning in a whisper. The blades caught the air. The turbine began to rotate. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. It wasn't loud. It was a low, rhythmic sound, like a giant breathing. But the shadow came alive. Because the blades were helical, the shadow didn't just move across the pool. It pulsed. It expanded and contracted. It flickered. It swept across Patricia's lounge chair. Light, dark. Light, dark. Light, dark. It was like a slow-motion strobe light. I saw Patricia shift. She adjusted her hat. She moved her chair a few feet to the left. The shadow followed her. As the sun moved, the angle changed, and the spinning blades cast a wide, sweeping net of flickering darkness. She sat up. She looked at the tower. The blades spun lazily, mocking her. She looked at me. I raised my beer in a silent toast. She stood up, threw her towel on the ground, and marched inside. The slam of her sliding glass door was audible even from my porch. "Direct hit," Mike said. "Bullseye," I agreed. But I knew this was just the skirmish. The war had just begun. Patricia wasn't the type to retreat. She was regrouping. She was calling lawyers. She was summoning the dark forces of the HOA board. I took a sip of my beer. Let them come. I had federal law, a 30-foot tower, and enough kinetic energy to power a small village. I was ready. Friday was the day of independence, the day I officially seceded from the grid. Dave, the electrician Big Mike had recommended, was a guy who looked like he'd been electrocuted a few times and enjoyed it. He had wild, frizzy hair and a tool belt that weighed more than my first car. He spent the morning in my basement, wrestling with the main breaker panel. "All right, Jack," Dave yelled up the stairs around 11 o'clock a.m. "We're ready for the cutover. You might lose Wi-Fi for about 30 seconds. Try not to panic. I went down to the basement. The new inverter system was mounted on the wall next to the breaker box. It was a sleek, white unit with a digital display that glowed a soft, futuristic blue. Beside it sat a stack of lithium iron phosphate batteries, the size of a small refrigerator, capable of storing enough juice to run my house for 3 days of darkness. "Okay," Dave said, wiping sweat from his forehead with a rag that smelled like ozone. "Here's the deal. I'm going to pull the meter. Then I'm going to isolate your main bus from the street feed. Once we do that, there's no going back unless you want to pay the power company a reconnect fee that costs more than a used Honda." "Do it," I said without hesitation. Dave grinned. He walked outside. I followed. The electric meter was on the side of the house, ironically facing Patricia's driveway. Dave cut the seal with a pair of snips. He grabbed the glass bowl of the meter. "Say goodbye to the bill," Dave said. Yank. The lights in the house flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. For a second, there was silence. Dave worked quickly. He capped the lines. He installed a blank plate over the socket. Then he went back inside and flipped the giant switch on the inverter. Click-chunk. A low hum started. It wasn't the annoying rattle of a gas generator. It was the high-pitched whine of capacitors charging, ascending in pitch until it went ultrasonic and vanished. The lights flickered back on. The refrigerator compressor kicked in. The Wi-Fi router beeped. I looked at the display on the inverter. Input: wind, 3.2 kW. Battery: charging, 45%. Grid. Status: disconnected house load, 0.8 kW. "You are now an island, my friend," Dave said, clapping me on the shoulder. "You're off the teat. The power company is dead to you." I felt a surge of pride that was almost primal. I walked outside and looked up at the turbine. The wind was blowing a steady 10 knots. The gray helix was spinning, silent and deadly efficient, turning kinetic energy into cold air conditioning. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "It's loud," Dave noted, tilting his head. "Not loud, but distinct, like a giant fan." "It's the sound of freedom, Dave." "Right. Well, that'll be $2,000. I paid him. I sat on my porch. I opened the app on my phone that connected to the system. I watched the little animated green arrows flowing from the turbine icon to the house icon. I felt invincible. Then 2:00 p.m. rolled around. The sun moved into position. The shadow of the tower, which had been lurking harmlessly on the grass, began its daily invasion of the property next door. Today, however, Patricia was prepared. Or so she thought. She had guests. It was Friday afternoon, which meant it was time for the Rolling Hills Garden and Wine Club. This was a group of 5 or 6 women who gathered to drink Pinot Grigio and judge everyone else's landscaping. They were set up on the pool deck. Patricia had put out a spread of cheese and crackers. They were laughing, clinking glasses, and enjoying the sun. I watched from behind the safety of my blinds. I felt like a Bond villain. "Jack," Sarah said, coming up behind me. "Stop lurking. It's creepy." "I'm not lurking," I said. "I'm monitoring the environmental impact of our energy solution." "You're waiting for them to scream?" "I'm waiting for the data." At 2:15 p.m., the shadow made landfall. The wind was stronger today than it had been during the installation. The turbine was spinning at a brisk 60 RPM. The shadow swept over the cheese plate. Whoomp, whoomp, whoomp. It was hypnotic. Because of the spiral shape of the blades, The shadow didn't just pass. It twisted. It looked like a giant dark corkscrew was drilling into the pool deck. I saw one of the women, a lady in a large floppy hat, look up. She shielded her eyes. She pointed at the tower. Patricia waved her hand dismissively, clearly explaining that she was handling it. But the shadow didn't care about her explanation. It kept coming. Flicker, flash, flicker, flash. As the sun lowered, the angle became more aggressive. The shadow elongated. It hit the water of the pool, creating a disorienting ripple effect. Then it hit the women. It was like being in a disco that played only slow-motion terror music. The light on their faces pulsed. Bright sun, dark shadow, bright sun, dark shadow. Every second. I saw the lady in the floppy hat put her drink down. She rubbed her temples. Another woman stood up and moved her chair. But there was nowhere to hide. The tower was 35 feet tall. The shadow covered the entire patio. Patricia was getting agitated. I could see her stiff posture. She was aggressively eating a cracker. Then the wind gusted. The turbine sped up. Whirr! The shadow accelerated. The strobing effect went from a slow pulse to a rapid flicker. It was genuinely annoying. It was the kind of visual stimulus that makes you want to vomit after 5 minutes. The Garden and Wine Club broke. The floppy hat lady stood up, grabbed her purse, and seemingly said, "I can't take this." She walked briskly toward the side gate. The other women followed suit. It was a mass exodus. Within 3 minutes, Patricia was alone on her deck, surrounded by half-eaten cheese and the rhythmic, mocking shadow of my clean energy. She stood up. She turned toward my house. She screamed. I couldn't hear the words through the double-paned glass, but I could read the body language. It was a scream of pure, impotent rage. She stormed inside. 10 minutes later, the police arrived. This time, it wasn't the private security rent-a-cop. It was a real cruiser from the county sheriff's department. 2 of them. I saw the lights flashing in the driveway. I sighed, put down my beer, and walked to the front door. I opened it before they knocked. "Afternoon, officers," I said. There were 2 of them. One was an older guy, Sergeant Miller, again, no relation, just a popular name, who looked like he was 3 days from retirement and tired of everyone's crap. The other was a rookie, Officer Davis, who looked eager to use his notepad. "Sir, are you Jack Miller?" the sergeant asked. "I am." "We received a 911 call from your neighbor, a Mrs. van der Hoven. She claims you are... Let me get this right." He squinted at his dispatch notes. "Assaulting her with a strobe light weapon and inducing medical distress." I fought the urge to laugh. "A strobe light weapon?" "That's what she said. Do you have a strobe light, sir?" "No, sir. I have a wind turbine." "A wind turbine?" "Come around back," I said. "I'll show you." I led them through the side gate. The turbine was humming along beautifully. The sergeant looked up at the gray steel tower. He looked at the spinning blades. He looked at the shadow flicking rhythmically across the fence and onto Patricia's property. He took off his hat and scratched his head. "Well, that's a big one." "It's a vertical axis wind turbine," I explained. "Completely legal. Permitted by the county. Protected by state and federal law." "And the shadow?" the sergeant asked, watching the flicker. "It's a shadow, Sergeant. The sun hits the object blocks the light. Physics." "It is kinda annoying," Officer Davis noted, squinting. "Like a rave." "It's clean energy, officer," I said. "Sometimes saving the planet requires sacrifice." Just then, Patricia came storming out of her back door. She had clearly been watching for them. She was wearing a bathrobe now, looking like a tragic opera heroine. "Officer! Officer!" she shrieked, running to the fence. "Arrest him! Look at it! Look at what he's doing to me!" "Ma'am, calm down," the sergeant said. "Calm down? I almost had a seizure," she lied. "My guests had to leave. He's doing this on purpose. He installed that monstrosity just to harass me." "Mrs. Vanderhoven," the sergeant said heavily. "Did he threaten you?" "His shadow is threatening me." "Did he enter your property?" "His shadow entered my property." The sergeant sighed. He looked at me. He looked at the turbine. He looked at Patricia. "Ma'am," he said, "a shadow is not a person. It's not a projectile. I can't arrest a shadow for trespassing." "It's a nuisance," she yelled. "It's a health hazard. It's psychological torture." "Then you need to call a lawyer," the sergeant said. "This is a civil dispute. There is no criminal intent here. The man has a permit for the structure. The son is, well, the son." "You're useless!" she screamed at the police. "I pay your salary!" "Actually, ma'am, property taxes pay our salary, and Mr. Miller here pays those too," the sergeant said, his patience snapping. "We're leaving. Do not call 911 unless there is an emergency. A shadow is not an emergency." They turned and walked away. "Have a nice day, sir," Officer Davis said to me, hiding a smirk. "You too, officers," I said. As they left, Patricia gripped the fence. Her knuckles were white. She looked like a prisoner gripping the bars of a cell. "You think you've won?" she hissed. "I think I'm carbon neutral, Patricia," I said. "And you should probably put some sunscreen on. That shadow won't protect you from UV rays entirely." She let out a sound that was half growl, half sob, and ran back into her house. I went back inside. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, her face pale. "The police came," she said. "And they left," I said, opening the fridge. "Want a lime claw? It's chilled by wind power. Tastes better." "Jack," she said warningly. "She's not going to stop. You humiliated her in front of the wine club. You humiliated her in front of the cops. She's going to escalate." "Let her," I said. "I'm off the grid. I'm invincible." I was wrong about the invincible part. I wasn't invincible. I was just legally complicated. 2 days later, the letter arrived. It wasn't a standard HOA fine this time. It was a thick envelope on heavy bonded paper. It was from the law firm of Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe, or something equally pretentious. Cease and desist and intent to sue. I sat down and read it. It was impressive. They weren't suing me for the turbine itself. They knew the federal law protected the existence of the device. Instead, they were getting creative. They were suing me for tortious interference, claiming the strobe effect prevented her from enjoying her property. Private nuisance, claiming the low-frequency vibration, which didn't exist, was causing structural damage to her pool. Intentional infliction of emotional distress. Claiming I built it solely to harass her. They were demanding the immediate removal of the tower, $50,000 in damages for loss of enjoyment and legal fees. $50,000, Sarah whispered, reading over my shoulder. "Jack, we don't have $50,000. We have a wind turbine and a cooler full of beer." "They're bluffing," I said, though my stomach did a little flip. "They're trying to scare us." "It's working," she said. I called Big Mike. "Mike," I said. "They lawyered up." "Expected," Mike said, chewing on something crunchy over the phone. "Who is it?" "Some firm downtown. They're claiming tortious interference." "Cute," Mike said. "Listen, Jack, I've got a guy. His name is Saul. Well, not Saul, but he's basically Saul. His name is Alan. He hates HOAs. He took a case last year where a guy painted his house pink to support breast cancer awareness, and the HOA tried to foreclose. Alan destroyed them. I'll send you his number. I called Alan. Alan didn't sound like a lawyer. He sounded like a tired bartender. So, Alan said, after I explained the situation. You built a strobe light next to a Karen's pool using a federal green energy loophole? Essentially, yes. And now she's suing for emotional distress? Yes. I love it, Alan said. I'll take the case. My retainer is usually $5,000, but for this, give me $2,000 and a case of whatever beer you're drinking. Done. Here's the strategy, Alan said. We don't just defend, we counterattack. You said you disconnected from the grid, right? Yes. Good. That makes you a vital infrastructure provider for your own home. If they force you to take it down, they are depriving you of essential utilities. That's a human rights violation in some courts. But we need more. We need to prove that her complaints are baseless. We need data. What kind of data? I need you to log every time she complains. I need you to measure the actual decibels, and most importantly, I need you to not back down. If you show weakness, they win. Keep the turbine spinning. Oh, it's spinning, Alan. It's spinning like a top. Good. I'll draft a response. In the meantime, ignore the letters. Unless a judge signs it, it's just expensive toilet paper. I hung up. I felt better. The next week was a war of attrition. Patricia tried everything. On Tuesday, she aimed a floodlight at my bedroom window. It was a 1,000,000 candle power spotlight. I countered by installing blackout curtains and sending her a "thank you for the security lighting" card. On Wednesday, she hired a sound expert to stand at the fence with a microphone. I went out and started mowing the lawn right next to him until he left. On Thursday, she tried to block the wind. I'm not kidding. I looked out the window and saw a team of landscapers planting bamboo. Full-grown, 20-foot-tall bamboo right along the property line. I called Mike. Can she do that? Bamboo takes years to get thick enough to block wind, Mike laughed. And by the time it gets that high, it'll be invading her pool foundation. Let her plant it. But the real escalation happened on Saturday. It was the peak of summer. The temperature hit 102 degrees. The grid was straining again. The news was warning of rolling blackouts. My system was fully charged. The batteries were at 100%. The AC was set to a frosty 68 degrees. At 3:00 p.m., the grid failed. The entire neighborhood went dark. The hum of AC units died instantly. The silence returned. Except for the whoosh, whoosh, whoosh of my turbine. I walked outside. It was apocalyptic. People were coming out of their houses, sweating, looking at their phones. I saw Patricia in her backyard. Her pool pump had stopped. Her waterfall had dried up. Her house was dark. She looked at my house. My windows were glowing with warm light. She could hear the faint hum of my compressor. She walked to the fence. She didn't scream this time. She looked defeated and thirsty. "Jack?" she said. Her voice was parched. "Patricia," I said. Do you have power?" "I do. The wind is very productive today." She looked at the turbine. It was casting its shadow on her silent, still pool. "My insulin," she said. "My husband's insulin. It's in the fridge. It needs to be kept cool." I paused. This was it. The moment of total victory. I could tell her to kick rocks. I could tell her to eat the bylaws. I could tell her that Section 4, Paragraph B, prohibits begging for power. But I looked at her. She was sweating. She was old, and despite everything, she was a human being. A terrible, annoying, litigious human being. But a human nonetheless. "Bring it over," I said. She blinked. "What?" "Bring the insulin," I said. "I have a mini fridge in the garage. It's running on wind power. You can store it there." She stood there for a long moment. The struggle on her face was epic. She had to swallow her pride, her anger, and her lawsuit, all in one gulp. "Thank you," she whispered. She came over a minute later with a cooler bag. I let her into the garage. I put the medicine in the fridge. "Is there anything else?" I asked. She looked at the main fridge in the garage, stocked with cold beer and soda. Could I have a bottle of water?" I handed her a bottle of water. It was ice cold. Condensation dripped down the side. She cracked it open and drank half of it in one gulp. "That turbine," she said, wiping her mouth. "It really powers the whole house?" "And the garage," I said. "And the TV. We're watching a movie right now." She looked at the turbine again. "It's still ugly," she said. "It's functional, Patricia. Form follows function." She turned to leave. "This doesn't change anything about the lawsuit," she said, her voice regaining some of its edge. "My lawyer says you're depreciating my property value." "Patricia," I said, leaning against the doorframe. "Right now, your house has no power and is 90 degrees inside. My house has power and is 68. Which property do you think is worth more at this exact second?" She didn't answer. She just walked back to her dark, hot house, carrying her cold water. I went back inside. "You helped her?" Sarah asked. "I stored her husband's meds," I said. "I'm not a monster, I'm just a guy with a windmill." "Turbine," Sarah said. "Whatever." The blackout lasted 6 hours. When the power finally came back on around 9:00 p.m., I heard a cheer go up from the neighborhood. But I didn't cheer. I didn't care. The grid could go up, down, or sideways. I was free. However, the truce was short-lived. Monday morning, I got a call from Alan. "Jack," he said. "Bad news." "What? Did she find a loophole?" "No, she found a judge who happens to be the president of his HOA. They've granted an emergency injunction. There's a hearing on Friday. And until then, you have to turn it off." "Turn it off?" I shouted. "I can't turn it off. I'm disconnected. If I turn it off, I have no power." "The judge says you have to break the turbine to stop the shadow flicker," Alan said. "He says the strobe effect constitutes an immediate health hazard. So I have to sit in the dark? Or reconnect to the grid?" "I cut the lines, Alan. It costs $5,000 to reconnect." "Then you better buy some candles," Alan said. "Or you figure out a way to comply with the order without actually turning it off." "Malicious compliance?" I asked. "It's your specialty, isn't it?" I hung up. I walked out to the backyard. I looked at the turbine. I had to stop the blades from spinning. That was the order. Cease the rotation causing the visual nuisance. I looked at the tower. I looked at the blades. Then I had an idea. The order said I had to stop the rotation. It didn't say I couldn't modify the blades. If the shadow was the problem, maybe I just needed a different kind of shadow. Or maybe, just maybe, I could make the shadow worse by making it static. I called Mike. "Mike," I said, "bring the crane back." "Why?" "We need to paint the blades," I said, "and I need to install a few accessories." "Accessories?" "Yeah, the judge says no flickering, so we're going to stop the flicker." but we're going to give them something else to look at. Jack, Mike said, a warning tone in his voice. What are you planning? I'm planning on turning my turbine into a piece of art, I said. A very, very bright piece of art. The silence was worse than the noise. That's what I told myself as I stood in the backyard on Tuesday morning, staring up at the paralyzed turbine. The brake was engaged. The massive helical blades, which had been spinning with such elegant efficiency, were now locked in place. They looked dead. A monument to bureaucratic overreach. My phone buzzed. It was an alert from my energy app. Battery level, 62%. Conserve power. Without the wind input, I was bleeding electrons. The refrigerator, the freezer, the idle load of the house, it was all draining the battery bank. I had maybe 24 hours before the lights went out. Patricia was in her backyard. She was wearing a triumphant white sun hat. She was sipping iced tea. She wasn't even tanning. She was just sitting there, staring at the motionless turbine, gloating. She waved at me. A little, dainty finger wiggle. "Quiet morning, isn't it, Jack?" she called out. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Patricia," I replied, forcing a smile. "Oh, I intend to," she said. "My lawyer says the judge will likely order the structure removed entirely on Friday. Something about attractive nuisance doctrines." "We'll see," I said. I went back inside. Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, reading a book by candlelight. "We have power, you know," I said. "You can turn on a lamp." "I'm practicing," she said grimly. "For when we go dark tomorrow." "We're not going dark," I said. "I have a plan." "Does the plan involve jail?" "Not yet." I called Alan, my disheveled lawyer. "Alan," I said, "I read the injunction again. And? It says I have to cease the mechanical rotation to prevent the stroboscopic effect. It doesn't say I have to take it down. It doesn't say I can't perform maintenance." "Correct," Alan said cautiously. "You are allowed to maintain your property." "Why?" "Well," I said, "since the turbine is now a stationary object of significant height, I'm worried about safety. Aviation safety. Bird safety. I feel a moral obligation to make sure it's visible." "Jack," Alan sighed. "Define visible." "High visibility," I said. "Federal Aviation Administration standards, or maybe just safety standards. Jack, don't do anything that violates the aesthetics clause of the HOA." "Actually, Alan," I said, pulling up a PDF on my laptop, "I found a clause in the HOA bylaws. Section 12, paragraph D. Safety equipment and markings mandated by safety concerns are exempt from aesthetic review. It's meant for things like reflective driveway markers or alarm boxes, but it doesn't specify size." "You're walking a fine line," Alan said. I could hear the smile in his voice. "If you make it a safety issue, they have a harder time arguing against it. But if the judge thinks you're mocking the court—" "I would never mock the court," I said. "I'm just a concerned homeowner trying to prevent a low-flying crop duster from hitting my dormant power plant. We don't have crop dusters in the suburbs, Jack." "You never know," I said. "Climate change." I hung up. I called Big Mike. "Mike," I said, "do you have access to industrial-grade safety paint?" "What color?" "The loudest, brightest, most retina-searing orange you can find. OSHA screaming orange. And do you have anything that glows?" "I've got phosphorescent epoxy meant for highway lane markers," Mike said. "It charges in the sun and glows toxic green for 12 hours. "Bring it all," I said. "And bring the crane. We have maintenance to do." Mike arrived at noon. The crane setup was becoming a familiar sight in the neighborhood. Patricia came out to the fence immediately. "What are you doing?" she demanded. The judge said stop. He said stop the rotation, I corrected. He didn't say I couldn't paint. Rust prevention, Patricia. Very important. It's brand new steel. It doesn't have rust. Preventative maintenance, I said. Mike and his crew went up in the basket. They didn't just paint it. They anointed it. They covered the sleek, industrial gray blades with a coat of international orange, the color used on the Golden Gate Bridge and life vests. It was a color that didn't just reflect light. It seemed to amplify it. Against the backdrop of the blue sky and green trees, it looked like a glitch in the simulation. It was aggressively, violently orange. But we didn't stop there. On the leading edges of the helix, Mike applied the phosphorescent strips, broad 4-inch stripes of high-grade glow-in-the-dark epoxy. By 4:00 p.m., the job was done. The crane lowered. The result was hideous. It was magnificent. It looked like a giant, twisted traffic cone had mated with a nuclear warning buoy. Patricia stood on her deck. She took off her sunglasses. She put them back on. "It's orange," she whispered. "Safety orange," I called out. "Since it's not moving, birds might run into it. I'm protecting nature, Patricia. I thought you'd be pleased." "It ruins the view," she shrieked. "It clashes with the pool. It clashes with the sky. It clashes with God." "Safety first," I said solemnly. That evening, the sun went down. This was the test. Sarah and I sat on the back porch. We drank warm beer because I had turned the fridge down to save power. The sky darkened. The orange faded into a muddy brown. And then the glow kicked in. The phosphorescent strips had been soaking up UV rays all afternoon. As the ambient light failed, they began to emit a sickly, radioactive green light. Because the turbine was a helix, the glowing stripes looked like a strand of alien DNA hovering 30 feet in the air. It cast a faint, eerie green wash over the fence. I looked over at Patricia's house. Her bedroom window faced the backyard. The green glow was definitely visible. It wasn't a spotlight, but it was there, a ghostly, hovering presence. "It looks like a haunted barbershop pole," Sarah observed. "It looks like compliance," I said. The next morning, my battery was at 30%. We were entering the danger zone. I took a quick, cold shower. Patricia was already outside when I left for work. She looked tired. "It glows," she said. She didn't yell. She just stated it like a weary witness to a crime. "Aviation safety," I said. "Night visibility." "I'm calling the judge," she said. "See you in court on Friday," I said. Thursday was tense. My battery hit 10%. I had to shut off everything except the fridge. We ate sandwiches in the dark. "Is it worth it?" Sarah asked, looking at the glowing green monolith in the yard. "Yes," I said. But I was sweating. If we lost on Friday, I'd have to tear it down, pay the fines, and crawl back to the power company. It would cost me 20 grand, easy. Friday morning, the day of judgment. I put on my only suit. It was a little tight around the shoulders. I grabbed my folder of documents, the federal statutes, the state laws, the HOA bylaws, and a printout of the FAA guidelines on obstruction, marking, and lighting, which didn't technically apply to structures under 200 feet, but I hoped the judge wouldn't notice. I met Alan at the courthouse. He was wearing a suit that looked like he'd slept in it, but his eyes were sharp. "Ready?" he asked. "As I'll ever be." We walked into the courtroom. It was small, smelling of lemon polish and old wood. Patricia was there with her lawyer, a guy named Sterling, who looked like he cost $500 an hour. He had perfect hair and a briefcase made of leather that probably came from an endangered species. The judge entered. Judge Holloway. He was an older man with bushy eyebrows and a face that suggested he had zero tolerance for nonsense. Docket 402, the clerk announced. Vanderhoven versus Miller. Sterling stood up. He buttoned his jacket. Your Honor, he began, his voice smooth as silk. We are here to request a permanent injunction and an order for removal of a nuisance structure. The defendant, Mr. Miller, has erected a 35-foot industrial turbine in a residential zone. Not only did the strobe effect cause my client medical distress, but after your temporary order to stop the rotation, Mr. Miller proceeded to paint the structure a blinding neon orange and cover it in glow-in-the-dark chemical agents. It is a spite fence, Your Honor, pure and simple. He handed the judge photos. The judge looked at the photo of the safety orange turbine. His eyebrows went up. Mr. Miller, the judge said, looking at me, is this accurate? You painted it orange? Allen nudged me. I stood up. Yes, Your Honor. Why? Safety, Your Honor, I said, keeping my voice steady. Once the court ordered me to stop the rotation, the turbine became a static, invisible hazard to local wildlife. Birds are used to avoiding moving objects. Stationary, gray objects blend into the sky. I was terrified a hawk or an owl might strike it. I consulted safety guidelines and applied high-visibility markings. The phosphorescence is for bats. The judge stared at me. For bats? Yes, sir. Night-flying mammals. Very important to the ecosystem. I see, the judge said. He didn't look convinced. And the wind generation? You are currently without power? I am running on fumes, Your Honor. My batteries are at critical. My family is sitting in the dark because I complied with your order. Allen stood up. Your Honor, if I may. Go ahead. The core issue here isn't the paint, Allen said, pacing the floor. The core issue is the right to generate. The Florida State Statute and the Federal Energy Policy Act explicitly state that a homeowner's covenant cannot effectively prohibit the installation of renewable energy. By ordering the turbine to stop, and by seeking its removal, the plaintiff is violating federal law. But the law allows for reasonable restrictions, Sterling countered. A strobe light into a bedroom is not reasonable. It's not a strobe light, Allen said. It's a shadow. And the only reason it's unreasonable to Mrs. Vanderhoven is because she insists on total control over the visual environment of the neighborhood. But she doesn't own the sun, and she doesn't own the wind. The judge leaned back. He looked at the photos again. He looked at Patricia, who was vibrating with suppressed rage. Mr. Miller, the judge said, if I allow you to turn it back on, can you fix the shadow? Fix the shadow? I asked. Can you make it less annoying? I thought about it. I can't move the sun, Your Honor. No, the judge agreed. But you can move the turbine. Move it? If you lowered it, the judge said, or moved it to the other side of the yard. The other side of the yard is shaded by oak trees, I lied, and lowering it reduces efficiency. Mr. Miller, the judge said, his voice hardening. I am a proponent of green energy, but I am also a proponent of neighbors not killing each other. The strobe effect is a valid nuisance claim. However, the plaintiff's demand to remove the structure entirely is excessive. He shuffled his papers. Here is my ruling. The structure stays. The federal law protects it. I felt a surge of joy. Patricia gasped. However, the judge continued, the flicker must be mitigated. Mr. Miller, you have 30 days to modify the operation of the turbine to prevent the shadow from casting a repetitive strobe pattern on the plaintiff's pool deck during peak hours. If you cannot, you must shut it down between 2:00 p.m. and 5:00 p.m. Shut it down? I said. But that's peak generation time. Then find a technical solution, the judge said. As for the paint, he looked at the photo of the glowing orange monstrosity. While I appreciate your concern for the bats, Mr. Miller, you will repaint it a neutral color. Gray, white, or sky blue. Sky blue? I asked. Sky blue, the judge said. Case closed. We walked out. We won, Alan said. Mostly. I have to shut it down for 3 hours a day, I grumbled. That's my AC power. Or, Alan said, you find a technical solution. I looked at Patricia. She was arguing with Sterling in the hallway. She looked furious. She had wanted it gone. Instead, she had a court order saying it stayed forever, as long as I fixed the flicker. She saw me. She marched over. You have to paint it, she spat. Blue, sky blue. I will, I said. And I'll figure out the shadow, Patricia. Don't you worry. You'll never figure it out, she said. Physics is physics. You can't make a shadow transparent. She walked away. I stood there, thinking. She was right. I couldn't make a shadow transparent. But maybe I didn't need to. I drove home. My battery was dead. The house was dark. I sat on the porch, looking at the glowing orange tower. Sky blue, I muttered. I pulled out my phone and Googled transparent wind turbine blades. Nothing. I Googled how to stop shadow flicker. Most of the results said, stop the turbine. I felt a pit in my stomach. Was this it? A partial victory where I had to ration power every afternoon? Then my phone rang. It was Big Mike. How'd it go? Mike asked. We keep the tower, but I have to kill the shadow, or turn it off. Kill the shadow? Mike laughed. What are you gonna do? Install mirrors on the blades? Tasikas froze. Mirrors, I whispered. I was joking, Jack. No, I said, my brain firing on all cylinders. Not mirrors, that would blind her. But what if we used light? Light? Mike, I said. A shadow is just an absence of light, right? Yeah. So if I fill the shadow with light, the shadow disappears. Jack, you're talking crazy. No, I said. I'm talking about LEDs. High-intensity, synchronized LEDs mounted on the tower, aimed at the shadow zone. If I time them to pulse in the exact inverse frequency of the blade pass, I can cancel out the strobe. You want to build an anti-shadow gun? I want to build a cloaking device, I said. I need you to find me some stadium lights and a very fast microcontroller. You're out of your mind, Mike said, delighted. I'll be there tomorrow. The next week was a fever dream of soldering, coding, and climbing. We painted the turbine sky blue. It actually looked kind of nice. It blended in with the horizon. Then we installed the rig. I mounted a bank of high-lumen LED floodlights on the fence line, aimed directly at Patricia's pool. I attached a sensor to the turbine shaft to track the RPM and blade position. I wrote a script on a Raspberry Pi controller. The logic was simple. When a blade passed between the sun and the pool, casting a shadow, the LEDs would fire a burst of light into the shadowed area. The light would fill the darkness. Shadow creates dark. Light fills dark. Net result: constant illumination. It was over-engineered. It was insane. It used about 10% of the power the turbine generated. But if it worked... Saturday, 2:00 p.m. Patricia was in her pool. She was waiting. She had a stopwatch. She was ready to log the violation if I didn't shut it down. I called Mike. "Fire it up." I released the brake. The blue blades started to spin. The shadow formed. It began to sweep toward the fence. "System arming," I muttered, watching my laptop screen. "Tracking RPM, 60, 65. The shadow hit the pool deck. Whoomp. Patricia looked up, pen poised over her notebook. Then I hit enable. The LED bank on the fence exploded with light, but not constant light. It pulsed. Flash, 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 flash. But it pulsed exactly when the shadow passed. To the naked eye, the effect was magic. 1 second, there was a flickering shadow. The next second, the shadow just dissolved. The light filled the gaps. The strobe effect vanished. Instead of a flickering darkness, there was just a consistent, slightly artificial brightness washing over her pool. Patricia stared. She lowered her pen. She waved her hand in the air. There was no shadow. The turbine was spinning. The sun was shining. But the shadow was gone. I walked to the fence. "Afternoon, Patricia!" I yelled over the hum of the turbine. "How's the light?" She looked at me. She looked at the floodlights. She looked at the turbine. "What did you do?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Active shadow cancellation," I said. "Science, Patricia. I filled the holes in the light." She stood there for a long time. She looked for something to complain about. Was it too bright? No, it was just sunny. Was it flickering? No, it was steady. She had nothing. She slowly closed her notebook. She picked up her towel. "You're a lunatic," she said. "I'm a pioneer," I replied. She went inside. I looked at the monitor. System status, stable. Power, output, positive. I high-fived Mike. We drank a cold beer. It was over. I had won. Or so I thought. Because the thing about messing with light and high-powered LEDs is that sometimes you attract attention, and not just from neighbors. That night, as the system was running a diagnostic test, a helicopter began circling the neighborhood. A black helicopter. It hovered over my house. The spotlight hit the turbine. My phone rang. It wasn't Mike. It wasn't Alan. "This is the Federal Aviation Administration," a stern voice said. "Mr. Miller?" "Yes." "We have reports of a non-compliant navigational beacon operating in residential airspace. We need you to step outside." I looked at Sarah. "The FAA?" she asked. "I think I might have accidentally created an unauthorized lighthouse," I said. I walked outside. The helicopter was loud. The wind from its rotors was spinning my turbine faster than ever. Power generation. 150%. I grinned. Even under federal investigation, I was making energy. The story wasn't over. But for tonight, the lights were on, the beer was cold, and Karen had no shadow. It was a good day.